great time.
We are live. Welcome. Welcome to our General Plan Advisory Committee meeting. It is Thursday, January 18th. We have a quorum. We are missing Joe Ingrafia. And I would like to get his name added at the top there with the list of people. Oh, and we're missing Rich, too. We still have enough. And we will start with a moment of silence. All right, thank you. And next will be the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we'll start off with any GPAC announcements. Anybody have anything? No? All right. And we have no presentations today, so we'll move on to public comment. And we have a few people in the audience. Anybody want to do public comment?
Good evening, GPAC. My name is Rigmore. I haven't really planned for anything today, but we looked at the TV right before, the internet, and I saw it had to do something with lateral, so we figured we'll come down here, and Cindy gave me a thing. I know that anything I say don't mean anything or matter at all, but my feet walked me down here. So if I'm totally out of script, just stop me. And I have always worried, and especially after Dr. Teff died, that people are not going to care enough about that we have a beautiful bay, we have a beautiful ocean, and it's all built up, which I think was the wrong thing to do in the first place. Should have been pushed further in. We have a few spots left, one from beach to GAFCO, and one from the last big building, intake building or whatever, out to the rock. And I know it's in Measure D, and I'm from a country where in the past, all fishermen, they got whatever fishermen want. They've changed that in Norway now. They see the ocean and the future of, open space and where people can freely go, much more valuable. And it really worries me when I saw on Measure D that the fisherman has a right all the way out to the rock on that stretch, and also from GAFCO to Beach Street. Now they're thinking about a haul out, so they're going to get big cranes and they're going to be down here scraping on their boats and stuff flying all over the place. I'm not going to be here. I'll be long dead, but you guys are here to look for the future, for your children, grandchildren, and it's in a trust for all Californians. I think that someone needs to, I want you guys to walk all of the bay and all the way out, not just drive in a car and look around. Oh yeah, it looks like people can walk there, they can walk here. I've been down there when we have, weekends, and people come from all over, and they're standing there taking pictures of the critters, and the kids want to be in the picture with the, if they start building buildings or whatever they want to do, we're going to be pushed off. When I first came here, I could walk out on those piers as much as I wanted. He was a little kid. We were going to go out with a rope and get crabs or whatever. Of course, we didn't get any, but anyway. And out in our now we're told, oh, don't go here. We're doing things. Oh, we have, we're not free anymore down there. And that's what I'm putting guilt on the GPAC. You need to look into. These people are smart. They know how to make good things, but they don't live here. They aren't going to have families or whatever here for forever. So thank you. I just want you guys to, this is it's for you to step up if you think the same. If you think, oh no, it's great, let's build out more bay, we need more money. We couldn't care if all the Californians come and look, or school kids, or open places, fine. I think open places in the future is going to be the most important. We're a small city, and even now, they don't come here. I know Susan thinks they come here to shop, but they don't all come here to shop. They'll come here because of the nature, and then they do shopping. So, I don't know. That's just what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Rigmor. Any other public comment? No? We will close public comment. We have nothing on the consent calendar, no unfinished business, so we'll go straight to new business.
Hi, everybody. Nice to be here, and I'd like to introduce Lindsay Klein. She works with me in the San Luis Obispo office, and she's worked quite a bit on what we're going to be talking about tonight. So she may jump into the conversation, or she may just help me keep track of everything that we talk about tonight. So we have one item before us tonight, and this is to have our first discussion of the Lateral Access task, which is part of the Round 3 Coastal Commission grant that the city received to do additional study of certain coastal priority issues. And we're going to present to you a poster that we've drafted that gets into this, and I'll talk a little more about it in a minute. For the whole project in general, we are working away on a couple different items. We have a second draft of the plan, a second admin draft of Plan Morro Bay, almost ready. It will be going to the Coastal Commission staff for their review. The city staff has reviewed it, and so the next step is for Coastal Commission to review it, and then it will be public after that, once we address anything that they want us to take a look at in this first preliminary review that they will do. So we expect to have that out the first quarter of this year. The zoning code, last time you discussed what we are calling Module 2, so basically the second big chunk of the zoning code, and that will be going to the Planning Commission on February 6th, and after that we will bring to you the third module, which is still being drafted. We also are working on the draft environmental impact report, and that will follow all of these other documents. So lateral access is an official Coastal Act term, and it means the access along the coast. So vertical access is the other type of access for people to access the coast, and that is, for example, where you might go from Embarcadero down to the water in between several buildings, or you might just walk down the beach, depending on where you are in Morro Bay or in a coastal city. Lateral access refers to any way that you might traverse the land or right next to the land. We'll get into that. All the way from the southern end to the northern end of the city. So Morro Bay is in pretty good shape in terms of the lateral access that you already have. I like that Rigmor said walk everything, because the three of us actually did get to walk the entire focus area that we're going to talk about more tonight. And even though I've spent a really big chunk of my life in San Luis County, I had never done that, in one fell swoop, and you really do notice a lot of things. So that's the idea, is how are there challenges along the way to a pedestrian, in particular, maybe to somebody who needs additional help with access, or someone who's not as familiar with Morro Bay? And where do we see things that we think are already very helpful and kind of meeting what we're looking for with this access and what the Coastal Commission is looking for, and where might that be improved? And the goal of this task being included was because it's of interest to the Coastal Commission, but also because it is something that has been in the city's local coastal program ever since the 1980s, but it isn't as clearly laid out as it could be. So in the future, we'd like it to be really clear to everybody at the city and everyone in the community what the requirements are for providing lateral access along the coast. So like I mentioned, there is a focus area that we've been looking at. There is a poster here in front of you. We made it about as big as we could for today. It's also in your packet. We can definitely move it around and take a closer look at it during the course of the meeting if that would be helpful. And I realize it's facing the GPAC, so if others in the audience would like to have it turned towards them for part of the time, I think we can do that. So the area that we focused on is on the north end, from Morro Bay Oyster Company, to the south end where the 456 Embarcadero suites are. And we chose this focus area for a couple of reasons. One is that the lateral access outside of that area is generally pretty good. There are some gaps. For example, south of this focus area, there are some areas where you cannot walk right along the coast. And some of that has to do with property ownership. A lot of it has to do with topography challenges. So the other main reason this area was selected is because it is the area that is the state tidelands trust land. So it is of even greater public interest than regular coastal zone land. And it is somewhat under the control of the city when those properties come up for lease negotiation. Then the city interacts with the people who are wanting to redevelop or develop there, and the city has the opportunity to ask for some improvements, including lateral access. So that's our focus area. The poster you see in front of you and that's in your packet is what we're calling the preferred lateral access alignment. And this is our first cut at, in the future, if every place in this focus area could have a connection, both on the Bayside, which would be if there are buildings between the Embarcadero and the water, it would be on the water side, and on the street side. So the street side is quite well connected. It would be the Harborwalk and then the Sidewalk south of the Harborwalk. But we'll get into some of the gaps there. There are more gaps on the Bayside. So the yellow line that is the preferred alignment mostly has at least two lines paralleling each other somewhat north to south. There are places where there's only one line, and for example, between the is it the Coffee Pot, I believe? Yeah, Coffee Pot and Giovanni's. There aren't any buildings, so there's just the existing access along the water there. There are about, let me double check to make sure I get all of them. This poster simplifies things to just show the alignment, but we are working on a memo that also digs deeper into the lateral access issues. And we have figures in there that show all of the different types of what we're calling existing access ways. So that would include the Harborwalk itself with its particular treatment of how it looks and some of the features that are along it, like benches and plantings and so forth. There would be piers that are public, floating access, which is also could include floating piers and floating access ramps and connectors between the two. One example is on the Bayside of Great American Fish Company. Bayside access, which would be also on the water side of buildings, but usually is a deck or some other type of more non-floating feature. So that's all the existing access that you have, and then we also have identified where there are gaps in that access. And I'm going to get a little more into the details of the poster. Before I do that, I guess, are there any questions about what I've said so far? Because we haven't talked about this before, so I don't know what everyone's thoughts are on it.
Just to clarification. You said this is a more limited focus area, but it seems like it covers all of our bay area down to the boat launch, which then below that is into the state park. So, am I not seeing it right?
The yellow line is what we're calling our focus area. So that might actually be a good comment, is that we should clarify that, or.
Well, that's what I mean. The yellow line goes from
It goes from just north of
Tidelands,
yeah,
all the way up to the Rock.
right.
So
it's a big chunk
that's
of the
most every
coastline.
part of the bay.
So
Except below that is finished in Tidelands all the way out to the boat launch. so-
right, we're just not including anything north of there, which is a pretty big segment of the city, but it's mostly beach. So there is
Oh, okay.
already
That's what you're talking about. Okay.
access. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah.
Because then south of the boat launch is some private property through there.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
cool.
So following on from that, I think that it would be interesting because there should be a whole lateral access map, right, for the whole coastline of the city. So, and that'll be included in the plan, I would think, right? I mean, we're not seeing it here, we're seeing a focus area map, but there is,
We could include that, yeah.
I think it should be. Because I think that it is the whole, there are different kinds of access, right? And in different parts of the city, and I think I don't know, I'm just always one for seeing the whole system. And I'm wondering, when I think about the area you were talking about, Rich, south of Tidelands, certainly there's a way to make your way along the coast, as you were saying, right? That it's not, that I think we have access. I mean, you can find your way, right? You can find your way all the way down into the state park, but you have to know what you're doing right now. You have to figure it out yourself. And so there's not a lot of conversation about signage necessarily in this, but it does seem to me that signage should be a component of this. So when I started thinking about signage, then I started thinking about the California Coastal Trail Alignment. And we were talking about the downtown and the waterfront plan. We were talking about how segments of that access overlapped, or we were going to focus on creating segments within that plan that were going to then be our California Coastal Trail segments. So I don't know if that's a question, but I think it's really important that we identify those segments and we call out kind of what these different systems are and where they overlap, and just that folks can really understand and find their way kind of through that whole system. And I have other specific comments about the actual focus area, but I can save those.
Okay, great.
So I had one question. You were mentioning that there are areas where the natural topography doesn't allow easy access. And I would kind of assume that it wouldn't be our goal to change those areas to make them less natural, just to make access easier. Especially in those areas you're talking about where you may be, for one, crossing private property. And I don't know if that's a requirement or something we want to build into the general plan, that in the future those things have to be required to be open. But also, I would hesitate to see us changing natural features to make that accessibility happen when there are many areas that are accessible.
So I don't know if, I think we'll kind of take comments and maybe not respond to everything right now in terms of a solution, but to clarify, the memo that we are preparing and will also be something that you'll have the chance to review is about 70 pages. It has design standards, it has wayfinding, it has a lot more information than this poster. This is sort of the thing that we can easily present and give a snapshot of this concept, but you'll definitely be seeing that as well. And the memo also has some draft policy language that applies to more than the focus area, and that language is coming forward in Plan Morro Bay. So I don't believe so that's the clarification, and we'll definitely take your comment into consideration on the policy side. But the design standards and that part of it really focuses on this area that's presented on the poster for now. And that's what our task in the Coastal Commission grant said, but we're definitely wanting to hear thoughts on the whole city as well.
So the idea behind showing you this before you had the memo done was to take input from you and then bake that into the memo so that we were trying to cover all the things and issues that others thought, because we all looked at it, but I mean, you all have different perspectives and walk along down there and see things that we don't see. And so we thought, well, that's what the GPAC's for, is to give us that input. And so we wanted to be able to bake some of that input into the memo that goes along with this. Certainly, point well taken that we need to look globally at access along the coast. Absolutely agree. But as Amy said, the task related to the poster in this effort was related to the grant deliverable, and that was looking at the gaps that we had along the waterfront. There are a few, and then the issues that you see when you're out there. Like, you walk along, and some areas look like they're public, and some areas look like they're not public, and they are. Or there's things in the way. You have different treatments out there, so you go from walking on wood to walking on metal to walking on different metal, and you have railings all along there that go from wood to metal, the wood, and back and forth. And so there's not a cohesive look, so you don't look at it and go, oh yeah, that's all access, right? You don't know the treatments change and that type of thing. So the memo does dive into that, I think is what Amy was kind of getting at.
Yeah. That was the question, was about, like, what is the Harborwalk treatment?
Right.
Sorry, yeah, my question, that was one of my questions, was like, what is the Harborwalk treatment? Because I feel that it's many things right now, and if you were going to fill those gaps, I'm not sure anybody would know what treatment to use to fill them with.
Yeah, that's what we were trying to make, something that's cohesive. And we also walked the whole thing and looked at all the signage, right? And that was one of the things that was a problem too, because there's any number of types of signage. Even the Coastal Commission required signage for it is different. Mm-hmm. And so there was no one theme that got you from A to B to C to D down the road. They all looked different, so you really never were sure where you were, and you didn't really know what you were looking for, because there wasn't one type of sign, and you might miss it. And so we sort of recognized all of that as we did the walk the one day that we walked the entire length of it. So those are the things that we saw. We certainly are interested in the things that you see when you're out there.
So I want to pass along a couple of comments from Joe and Grafia, but one of those would be regarding signage. I was just down near, I believe it's Rose's Landing. There are a couple signs back there that talk about coastal access and refer to a deck, but no one would ever see those signs. And if you saw them and then saw that it looked like a business, you might hesitate to go there anyway. Mm-hmm. So your memo is probably going to answer all of these questions, but I don't think that a lot of that looks accessible. The other thing that Joe raised is a design issue for the Bayside walkway. He's concerned that there's elevation changes as you go along there. Not just design changes, but if you're talking about a floating dock, for instance, versus something that's up much higher, there's going to be a lot of issues connecting those. The downstream concern about this is that if these become part of lease renewals, there needs to be a plan overall that connects all those dots so that the last guy in line who has to do an improvement isn't fixing things that were done easier by somebody else. Is that clear? Yeah, okay.
So, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say that is a subject that that comes up frequently when we're looking at this. This is probably where it came from for Joe, because he's on the Planning Commission and he reviews projects that come along, and sure. And we see those issues. There's gaps, or where they're going to put in. There's great differences between the properties and how you're connecting the lateral access pieces, and then you see, how are we going to connect if you're at the end and you're at one of those street ends, and so you have fixed points now, and you have to make those connections, and you have to make them in a way that's ADA compliant. And so there are concerns with that, and so the Planning Commission has given us, as has the City Council, given us direction when some of these lease sites have come up and proposed redevelopment and lateral access improvements to look at those things to make sure we're not precluding the future connections that gets us through those gaps that we now have. And so that's not a formalized policy thing at this point, but hopefully something that we're working toward, because it is something that comes up frequently when we're looking at those types of things. So that's a point well taken.
So well, first of all, I apologize for being late, but I was out on a walk out past the rock to watch the high surf and the Coast Guard's making their way out there. But so that reminds me, I'm glad I went out there because it reminds me of what I brought up maybe last fall or last summer, but about at least us looking at and putting something in writing about the exploring keeping the gate closed there at the Rock. I've been watching it all summer, and I brought this up back then, and we talked about the need that we have to go through state to get that approval and all that stuff. But to at least memorialize that we are maybe interested in doing that, because I've watched it. We walk the Embarcadero just about every day, and so I've had the luxury of watching that being closed most all summer since they were doing the excavating
I'm sorry,
out
which
and
gate are we
the
talking
dredging.
about?
I'm sorry. Thank you. The gate that's at the south end of the Rock, out by the Rock, that they close when high surf.
Right.
Okay, so they've had that closed the whole. Shortly after the dredging started, they started closing it. It's been closed all summer. Now I know when I brought that up in the fall, we had kind of concerns about, well, what would the surfers do? What would whatever? But I was there today, and surfers are just flocking there today with the surf in the bay. My point is, can we at least in our discussion, and I don't know if you brought this to Coastal, but can we discuss that? Because I looked as we walked there today, and it's such a perfect area with no parking to have some nice benches like we put over on the north side of the parking area. And I mean, you could have had a concession there today and been selling coffee like crazy, because there was a lot of people out there. And I think it could be more of a tourist attraction and developed into something that people would come to. And I realize we have to go through all the steps with the state and everything, but at least are we interested in doing that is what I'm trying to bring up here.
Yes.
I had a couple of issues with the street side of this walkway, because there's a lot of places where the sidewalk is really narrow, and you have utility poles that are there, and it's really hard to get by, especially with people going in two directions. In fact, I was a little disappointed when they did Anchor Park and they put that fake grass down, which is great, except that they didn't widen the sidewalk there. So, you still have it comes in and then it goes in this way and then goes that way. I mean, it was actually worse. They took one of those surfboard benches or whatever, and they had that actually sitting on the sidewalk, so you had like this much room. So I guess I would like to make sure that we need places to sit along the way so people can all abilities can come and use that area. But also, there needs to be room for people to walk in two directions at least. So even though on this map you may have things may be there and you may have access, it's not good access, and it needs to be improved. The sidewalks are just so narrow, and occasionally you have businesses who put things on them too. So anyway, I'd like to make sure that what we have there is a good quality
And
passageway
that's
as well.
been addressed in our downtown waterfront strategic plan, right? Given someday getting a developer.
It's actually been addressed in the Centennial Parkway and Embarcadero widening plan.
Right.
It was a separate effort to go to wider sidewalks along there, recognizing the issue that you raised. Our current policies as lease sites turn over there and redevelop is that you have a minimum 8-foot sidewalk out in front. The Embarcadero sidewalk widening project and Centennial Parkway project concept plan includes, wider sidewalks to 10 plus feet, and maybe to 12, including improvements for where you would have your light poles and seating and that type of thing to maintain a 10-foot sidewalk. So you could, walk. Bayside. And wider sidewalks, actually, depending on what treatment we do and how we deal with the parking there, wider on the east side as well.
Yeah, I was thinking about, but the street side as well, and really, the street side does need that as without poles in the middle of the sidewalk. So yeah.
Yeah. So we do have things in place right now to accommodate those, and one of the things to go do when we're done with this plan will be to update other plans. There's a lot of implementation that goes along with the general plan. It's several pages long, and one of those is going to be to update the Waterfront Master Plan. It's pretty old, outdated. It's kind of funky. You can't really tell what's supposed to happen. It's got terrible graphics in it, and would be to update that. And there's a desire to extend that, up to the Rock parking lot and incorporate planning for that area. It could even incorporate, some suggested changes to the area on state parks, and tell us to go work with state parks if we can through their planning process to maybe make stuff happen out there. That's an interesting thought process that Rich came up with idea anyway. And then we've recently been talking with between subcommittee of the Planning Commission and Harbor Advisory Board on Measure D and Working Waterfront. And Working Waterfront was interested in having that concept incorporated into the Waterfront Master Plan as well. And that's all waterfront area going all the way south down to state parks. And we operate the marina down at the end for state parks. And so yeah, there's some to go do things, when we're done, and I think that would be the place to put it in there and to really have a nice, I think, first class waterfront master plan as opposed to what we have now, which is a little funky and kind of hard to apply, and not unlike the documents that we're updating now with the general plan and LCP. So yeah, those are all things we're kind of tracking, I guess, at this point.
Would you like me to finish explaining the poster, and then we can continue with comments or discussion? So, as you see, there are 5 letters on the far right, and they correspond to places that we're pointing to along the preferred alignment. So some of these have to do with gaps or issues with the access, and some are examples that we think could be applied more broadly. And again, this all is gotten into in a lot more detail in the memo, which you will see, but let me go over each one of those. So there we go. So A, Harborwalk Treatment, we're pointing to an area here near Tognazzini's, another area right near Harbor Street. I'm not 100% sure what business is right there. And then a couple other areas further south. And the idea here is that these areas either could use a connection in terms of the harbor walk itself, which would be this northern example. There is a gap, and people walk in the parking lot up there. We observed, Lindsay went out and just watched pedestrian and car and bicycle traffic patterns for a while one day at various locations along the alignment, and it's not the greatest place for a pedestrian. So that is one place where there is access, but I don't remember who said you have to make your way. The other A's further south are all places where the sidewalk ends and there's a street end, and you can walk across it, but there really is no marking or indicator, especially to someone who might not be as familiar, that that is the pedestrian right-of-way, and it is this path that we're designating to follow the coast. So that's what A represents. B, we can see we've got one up here in the commercial fishing area. We've got another one here a little farther south near at Giovanni's. We have, do we have another one? No. Oh, yes, thank you. I believe this is the yacht club. Yeah, so these represent areas where there is access, but there are, it's kind of part of what Rigmore was talking about in her comments. There are competing things that we care about going on, and there are uses in those areas that are productive commercial uses, either for fishing or other coastal uses like pier building and so forth, and boating. But they don't always have the best pedestrian environment. For example, at Giovanni's, if you truly follow the waterside access there, you go through their, work area. So we're looking for your thoughts on what do we want? I think to me, it's a tough issue because we want access, but we also want to maintain things that are important to us. So that's what B represents, and there probably are, on all of these, there may be more examples, and if you have one that you want to point out for us to add, that's fine, but this is meant to be somewhat representative. But we're definitely looking for input moving forward. This is the first draft. So C. Okay, so C is called Bayside Access, but the places that we've marked as C actually represent lease sites that are up for renewal next year. And so I believe all of these, or almost all of these, have already gone through the process to have a plan for what's going to happen after the lease either expires or is renewed with the same leaseholder. So the reason we called these out is that there are quite a few. And right now, some of them do represent gaps in access. One example would be Off the Hook. So while currently there isn't Bayside access there, that is part of the plan for when the improvements occur. So that's letter C. Letter D addresses access in terms of those who need ADA access. And we only have one letter D identified on here, and there are probably other examples, but we do know that at the Libertine, oh, I'm hitting the wrong button. Sorry about that. Here, D, this is the Libertine site, and when they make their improvements, they will be putting in better ADA access. So that's one example of where that is planned for. We have a photo of some access that we think is pretty good, going down to one of the boating areas. So as Glenn mentioned, that's an ongoing issue, and there are better and worse examples of that in the existing lateral access. So finally, letter E is what we're calling floating access. So these are locations where, again, there are uses or structures that make it really difficult to have access on the Bayside. Some of them are commercial fishing uses or other uses that are not, they don't mix well with pedestrians or, just the general public getting in the way of their operations. So this is probably, from my perspective, the one that I am most interested in hearing feedback on, because one idea would be to have floating access in some of those places, but is that even a good idea? We'd like your feedback. So some examples might be at the furthest south end of the focus area here. I think this is the last 2 or 3 lease sites, and there's no access on the Bayside there now. I believe it's houses and a couple other things. Would that be a better spot to have floating access than in front of the processing business here? Perhaps. So that's what we've called out for now on the poster. We definitely are looking for ways that it can be improved or altered slightly to tell the story of what we're studying here. And I think fairly shortly you'll get to see the memo as well, and that will add to this work. But this is the poster for today, and definitely looking for your further thoughts.
Can you clarify when you say floating access, are you talking about docks, or what can you give us a better feel for what you mean?
Yeah.
Can you clarify what you mean by point C as well? You talked about multiple locations for C, and C's only appears on the map once. So I think it's a graphical thing, and I think maybe just all those, I'm not sure what C is supposed to be pointing to, actually.
That is a very good point, and I think there should be more than one on there, so we'll fix that. Yeah. But like I said, for example, it would be Off the Hook, Libertine, Gray's Inn,
Roses.
Yeah, so a great example is Gray's Inn. Actually, we'll be going to the City Council, I think, later this month. But on the west side of that building, there is a gap in access. It doesn't connect to the lease site to the north, so there is actually a physical dead end, and as part of their lease renewal, they're going to be putting in lateral access. And then, for example, Rose's Landing, yes, it does have lateral access. It's only 8 feet wide, and they have applications in process to widen that to 10 feet. So those are examples. The C is actually pointing to the location of Gray's Inn.
So
I thought maybe it was the aquarium.
I was
Isn't that
gonna
across
ask
the way?
The aquarium would also be in that list. I think there are about 6 or 7 leases that are up in 2018.
Just as a general point, just for ease of legibility, we're all looking for the business that this corresponds to. We keep looking for that. You probably ought to just put it on the map, and then we'd know where we are, because that's how we know these places. We don't
Okay.
know their numbers.
Yeah, we definitely wrestled with that decision for longevity. The addresses stand the test of time, but it definitely is more familiar to have the businesses. So thanks for that input.
Yeah.
Jan, did you have something?
No.
Okay.
Oh, did I?
I would, when you were talking about the juxtaposition of the fishing uses and public access, I think it's super important to maintain our fishing fleet. And I think that's been in our goals right from the beginning when we were talking about the values and so on and what we think of as our community. I also think that it's a big draw in terms of tourists liking to watch that fishing fleet do their thing when they're offloading, unloading, all of that. So perhaps the thing to do, in certain areas, you're not going to be able to go right up to the water's edge. But there are plenty of areas that you can. And if you had some, strategic walkways around those areas with similar information signs like we have along the Harborwalk, which I think has been a beautiful thing for our town, that Harborwalk, but have information signs that talk about the fishing fleet and what they're doing and what they're catching and why it's important to be safe and not under all of their equipment and that sort of thing.
Here.
I think, even if we did a slightly raised walkway going, I don't know what it would be. It's probably mostly going to relate to having wider sidewalks and fewer vehicles on the roads, and maybe not parking right along the edge of the road unless it's a fishing-related vehicle that needs to be unloading or loading up equipment. So that would be my response to that we need both. But I think if we have to, as lay people, lose our direct access right to that waterfront at that point or those 2 or 3 points along, get a fishing license. I don't know.
I would have to say that I agree with that. That would be a question, too, because does lateral access have to be all the way on the water side of the buildings? Because there are places down by the Harbor Hut and down in that area where there's fishing things going on, but the walk goes in front of the buildings. Does that count as lateral access?
So overall, that is what the Coastal Act says, but in our discussions that we've had, and I think the staff has had very project-specific discussions with the coastal staff, it's not always feasible.
Or desire.
So I think part of the reason for this process is to identify when possibly those, I don't know if exception is the right word, but those cases where there are competing interests that are of interest to the Coastal Commission. They also care a lot about coastal dependent uses and how do we make sure that there's clear direction about when that situation happens. So I think the answer is probably that it won't always be a one-size-fits-all.
And the boat haul-out we're talking about is a case in point, because if that does come to fruition, it's going to change that traffic pattern in there quite a lot. But at the same time, across the street from it is the new CCMMA building with the boats, a nice tourist attraction. So there's a balancing act in there, and I don't think people need to always be right on the water. So I'm agreeing with you that I think gaps are reasonable.
Especially when it's only a few steps away,
Right.
however you look at it. Yeah.
Yeah, and there is, in that area that you mentioned, Jan, the GAFCO, Harbor Hut, Morro Bay Landing, that was an example of floating access. So item C on the map, where they had some previous use permits approved, and it was found infeasible to provide landside, Bayside lateral access, and so they have this. There are signs there, especially on the South T-Pier, just south of GAFCO, where you can walk along the docks, and that gives you that intimate feel with the boats and the water. And there is a portion where it does wrap around the east side of Harbor Hut, because there is no floating docks currently west of Harbor Hut. So they have to go through an analysis that the Planning Commission finds it's infeasible.
Good, because my answer to that, or my question would then be, if you had floating docks there, there's a lot of work going on there. And wouldn't that interfere with what's going on there? So
It'd be safe.
that wouldn't really solve the problem of having a walkway on the bluff or having a floating walkway. You're still having people where the work is going on, pedestrians there.
Right, yeah, and then another case in point is Geo's. So they were conditioned to provide lateral access, and that access actually goes right through their working fishing operations. And so the way that was resolved is they're able to put up signage, and so when there's active unloading operations, that they are allowed to temporarily close that. They sign it. It's delineated with a hatched gold line in the parking lot. So yeah, we have to weigh that in because we want people to be safe.
Can I ask a question about the boat haul out? Because I've heard a lot about that, but the location, last I heard, was somewhere around across from the power plant. Is that, or the power plant parking lot? I'm
There's we call it the triangle lot because it's roughly triangular.
Yeah,
It's,
right,
you know,
the parking lot. But
that parking lot was part of Down was deeded over to the city. So that's the idea where the boat haul facility and boat storage would go, and then you would have the travel lift that would go through the parking lot there and go across the street.
So you're going to have boats going across the street?
Correct.
In that location? That seems odd to me. I mean, it almost seems like where you have the ramp, the boat ramp in the park on the other side of the Embarcadero, it seems easier to get boats in and out, and you have a place to, for lack of a better term, to put them, or to do whatever you're going to do with them. But taking them across the street, aside from the access questions which we just talked about, seems like just a real impedance to anything else going on in that area. So I don't know.
There would be limitations to the hours of operations when they could run the lifts, which is not a huge deal. I mean, they have the lift that operates in Avila. You've probably seen that, or if you've been to Santa Barbara out there and seen how they operate theirs. It would probably have to have some limitations during peak summer months as to when they operate, meaning first thing in the morning or later in the evening when they pull boats out, which is not a really hindrance to their, as long as you're scheduling it out, it's not a hindrance to their ability to do business. Avila has a lot of other limitations because theirs is not an enclosed harbor, so they're subject to wave action when the waves switch direction, and so you can only pull boats in and out of there at certain times. They have depth limitations as well there. We would have those similar depth limitations in the channel if we were to try to do it at the ramp, I guess, is what Eric Endersby, the harbor director, tells me. So I think it could be accommodated. It would be interesting, and it would slow traffic down because those things are not fast. They go pretty slow.
Well, I know.
And you'd have,
Yeah, and you've got things going, in 90 degrees. It just seems like to put it in a really busy part of the Embarcadero like that seems a very strange placement decision.
Yeah, I mean that's where we have the larger boats in that location, and again can't pull them out in the other end of the harbor. So there are limitations that they've looked at to this point from a feasibility standpoint, which is why they're looking at it there. There are other limitations to that site from an economic standpoint, whether it's viable or not, because it's pretty small. And usually what makes those things go is the boat storage component that you have with it. Or you have a whole bunch, you have a really active harbor, and then you have a bunch of recreational boats that get to use it too. But again, there's limitations, and that's part of what the process they're going through right now is sort of, can we get somebody that's interested in building it, with the size that it is, and then is it economically viable? What does the city have to do to make it economically viable related to incentivizing those things coming in, and is that worth it from a city standpoint? There's a lot of moving parts, and so they've been working through this for years, and I think probably will continue to be working through it for a few more.
Okay, well, that was going to be my next question, which is if you're going to restrict when you can use it or how much you use it, then I'm assuming it's supposed to at least pay for itself. Is that a question? I mean,
Part of what they're required to do, when we get to that point, will be a feasibility analysis as it relates financially. We had sort of a preliminary one done a while ago by Lisa Wise, I think. It was not a deep dive, and so they really need to probably do one that's a little more in depth to figure out whether it works, because ones that size that operate similarly to ours, what makes them tend to work is the amount of boat storage that you have that's in them, not just the being able to come out and work on boats. My understanding, I'm not an expert in that field at all, but it's the information that I've gleaned from talking with our harbor director and folks that do know, and so that's sort of where they're at right now. It's not in my house. It's in living in Eric Endersby's, the harbor director's world, and so he's the one that's sort of tasked with working through that.
So back to the display you had, I had a couple of questions. First of all, the floating dock idea, I think that's a really feasible opportunity. I need to tell you, though, that the one that's behind GAFCO now, they close it up. They've closed it now up on the South T Pier. There's a chain, they say no access. And it's supposed to be public access through there. So they may have their reasons. Go ahead.
We have that's ongoing issues we have.
Okay. I just thought I'd point that out as we
are aware.
So I support floating docks that are public access worthy. Because the accommodating for the tide changes 4 times a day is easily done, and that demonstrates that over there. It's kind of nice that we've had that put in because it demonstrates what we're suggesting here. So if people say, oh, no, that wouldn't work, we can say, well, yeah, it does. It does work. So the other thing was with Susan, I like what you were saying about the accommodation for the access to the working parts, and maybe I was toying with that idea. And if you bring you guys down as you walk this to the south end of Roses, as you look out across to the south, there is a commercial fishing operation there that primarily does hagfish, slime eels. And there's just a whole bunch of people that cluster right there and watch that as it happens. The thought I would go along with what Susan says, can we maybe look globally? I don't know we can enforce it, but suggest, like for Roses, I've been following that design, and they had original upstairs sun deck area out there. So if we can encourage that kind of thing next to a commercial operation, then people can be up there, spend money on a drink and watch a commercial operation and get that connectivity that we're talking about maybe. And Gilles, yeah, it's great because we go through there, and then they do close it off when they're operating, but I tell you what, you can still stand in the parking lot and see them unloading 200-pound swordfish and things like that are, to me, I think promoting our fishing operation by letting people actually see hands-on the fish that they buy in the market in plastic is a huge thing for us. So I think it's really important that we go the extra mile to be able to promote that. That's all for me for now.
I completely agree with that. I think it's so important that we make room for all the different uses on the waterfront. I just wanted to point out that we've talked so far about this plan, about the lateral access plan, and we've brought up the harbor, the new harbor, whatever we call it, downtown harbor plan, right? And then you reminded me about the Embarcadero widening plan because I sort of have forgotten about that entirely. And then we know about Centennial stairs, right? There's a lot of different plans. And so when I was trying to think about, so the issue that I want to get to is, lateral access is great, but I think what we were just talking about with access across the road to get to the lateral access, I think we've got to, we have to really document and address pedestrian improvements, across Embarcadero Road to get people to this lateral access, because the spot you were talking about with the potential boat haul out, I've always thought that was I know that there's challenges, with the boat haul out there, but frankly, the idea of it slowing down traffic in that stretch of that road, given that there's absolutely no crosswalks and you're kind of, you're running across the street and getting in the median, it seems like such a bad thing to me. It's a bad thing peak summer, but it's a lot of the time it's probably not such a bad thing. So, I really feel like these intersection treatments, or even spots that are now not even recognized crossings where people are trying to cross is an equally important part of lateral access, the lateral access plan, because it's not going to do us any good if we can't get people to it.
Excellent point. And was thinking about where the new museum stuff is going to be same issue. You're not encouraging people to go back and forth. You've got this beautiful walkway, but getting across those two lanes can be a real challenge.
Yeah, we've had numerous conversations with Public Works and Rob Livick, the Public Works Director and Engineer, about how we accommodate that. And we said, hey, they got this stuff kind of sitting here loosely originally when we first started. And I said, okay, now we're actually building the museum component of this, and they're just going to start drawing more people here. We need to have some safe way for people to get back and forth across, because it's just going to be more folks playing Frogger across the street, which is not fantastic, especially when we're busy.
Well, and when it's opened up for parking too, right? Behind there, right? There's public parking that happens there at certain times, and then you've got those people too. So,
Scott, are we anywhere near the 5-year CIP plan to look at opening up to the 41 to accommodate the increased traffic we've discussed a few times here?
What's the question again? So you say open up, 41?
We discussed sometime last fall, I think I brought up the fact that the increased traffic going to the Rock is getting a real bottleneck of traffic through that area, and I think that's probably what your concern is too. And when I brought that up, you mentioned that at some point we're going to have to open up and go over to the 41 to dump that traffic out instead of back through town.
So I think the thing that would precipitate that or to move that forward would likely be any sort of development related to the Dynegy project.
Oh, okay.
Because, one, you have to have somebody to pay for it, right? Probably not going to be the city. And two, any development there would have to have those secondary means of ingress and egress. You couldn't just have one point. You couldn't have anything that goes in there, any use of any substantial size that generates traffic would just shut down the Embarcadero, especially in the summertime during peak time. So they'd have to have another means that gets you out onto Highway 1 and then another means out that other direction as well, especially also if we do eventually move the wastewater treatment plant and we're able to redevelop the wastewater treatment plant site. You start needing to connecting these pieces, otherwise you're creating the same traffic issue over there if you put something that people want to go to there, even if it were more recreational fields and things like that people have talked about, even if it wasn't sort of.
So we're going to be speaking to that in our plan or looking at that. I think it's worth us considering that as we discuss these things that we need to do. And another thing, when you're talking about how would it be to cross the boats over, and you're probably aware of this, but if you go down to San Diego, the Coast Guard station is across from the airport, and I've witnessed this several times living down there, but they actually take the Coast Guard jets that are stationed on that side, on the water side, and they open it and they shut down the road. They have barricades, and then the jet taxis across and takes off from the airport.
Oh, I've never seen.
No, I'm serious.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. And then they come back and they land on the San Diego Lindbergh Field, come back around, taxi across the highway there, and go back and park.
Well, I think that would, of course, just be a nightmare in the middle of the summer, which is already a nightmare without it.
But I'm just, that's there's a lot of cars down in San Diego versus here. I was just bringing out, it can work, so.
I think the conversation we've had as it relates to the boat haul and the travel lift, it's just, certain times of the year you have to plan accordingly, and so you take things out early in the morning when we don't have a lot of traffic, and we're not so large that doesn't work. I think it's at least looking at the harbor body, that's a doable thing.
It does seem like, though, it sounds like there needs to be more work done on whether that's really a need that our boat owners and fishermen feel. I mean, I've certainly have heard it from some fishermen that we need that here. But there may be also other needs that might be easier to accommodate, like another ice machine source, more fuel sources, some of the support systems. I mean, I had always thought the boat haul out thing was important, but if we don't have studies that show it's going to be used and be a viable business. So as people who are working on the general plan, again, back to our goals to support that industry may not necessarily be to dictate what that is that supports the industry. In other words, that we would use that as a litmus test as proposals are coming forward. Is this good for that part of our community? Or do we want to make sure that we have a boat haul out in the general plan?
So that's a specific, it's part of our goals and objectives right now, the boat haul facility. It's attached to the Harbor Advisory Board, right? We have lots of committees. And that's one of the things they're tasked at working through, and that's what they're doing. It's a rather significant focus of theirs. They also are, we have the subcommittee of the Harbor Advisory Board and the Planning Commission right now that's working through Measure D explanations and definitions and working waterfront. We just met for the second time last week. We narrowed down the Measure D discussion which was fantastic. I didn't think we were going to actually get there in 2 meetings, and we did. And so we have some pretty clear direction, and we're going to meet again as a full HAB Planning Commission, both boards, in a joint meeting to have them hash out what that looks like, and then you'll get to see it. They'll put the policy together, and we'll run it back through, and you'll get to see it then, and it'll run back on up, and be attached to the overall Plan Morro Bay effort that goes from Planning Commission and recommendation to City Council. That's kind of how that works. So you'll get to see that effort, and so just one other piece of that they're working on that's actually related to this, and so they're sort of dialed into what's happening and paying attention to all of the things that run through GPAC and Planning Commission and that type of thing.
But in terms of what we're doing, right? I mean, we're doing land use and we're doing zoning, and so that site that we're talking about right now, it's designated public facility, so it's not so narrowly drawn, right, that it could only be a boat haul out. It's just that it can be a boat haul out. That's an allowable use there. So I think we're not being inflexible, I don't think,
Okay.
as far as what I've seen
And
so
we
far.
focused in on that project in the Downtown Waterfront Strategic
Right,
Plan,
right.
which is
It isn't.
related but is not part of the general plan
Right.
document going, for posterity. So, yeah.
So on the on the ADA ramp, just to clarify, at the Libertine, you said that they would be providing ADA access, but they'll also, this is a question, they'll also be providing Bayside and Front Street side wide sidewalks that accommodate, because there's a bottleneck right there at the corner, and there's a sunken part of the street that always holds water. I'm assuming we'll fix all that. I mean, it forces tourists out into the street every rain. Even us too. I mean, but you see large families and they all veer out into the water or around the water. So all of that'll be fixed with that. Is my question.
I know the Bayside is included, and I'll defer to Scott and Cindy on the sidewalk question.
So the sidewalks will be widened. They're required to be widened as part of the Waterfront Master Plan, and the plan and the Embarcadero Sidewalk Widening Plan. That was a concept plan that was adopted by council about a year ago. Mm-hmm. So it picks all those things up. You'll be getting connection between the street end there. That street end is supposed to be turned into a plaza as well, and then Libertine will connect to that, and then Libertine will connect to the north to Off the Hook, and then beyond that to the boatyard, buildings and stuff that are over there. So, that'll fill the gap there when we get those, and those are all coming forward now, and so we'll have things under construction within the next 18 months to 2 years in those locations, likely. So that's kind of exciting. We have the application in planning right now for Off the Hook. Libertine needs to come in. I think they need to get an extension on their consent of landowner actually for their plan, or figure out what they're doing. So that's all that stuff's kind of in play right now. We're going to have the most development happening at one time on the Embarcadero that I think anybody's ever going to have seen. So that'll be interesting how that works. Well, some of these projects, you can't build them in 6 months. They're projects that take a year to construct. So, yeah, well, staging and hopefully they're not all do it at the same phase at the same time. It's the main construction portion of it that gets you a lot of trucks coming in and out, and it tends to bog things down. So we'll be staging will be interesting how we work that out. So.
The refreshment trucks for the restaurants tend to block things now. I can't even imagine construction equipment.
Is there anything else on the way this is presented, kind of more the graphic side of things, that anybody has comments on? I haven't heard a lot of input on that side. Maybe it's perfect.
No, I would just say that, there's the Harborwalk treatment, and so again, it's a comment I've already made, just that, there's not a treatment that's described here. So maybe there could be a reference that says, that it will be described, right? Like, I just think this graphic needs more context, probably, because it says preferred lateral access alignment, and it's really for focused Bay Area, right? It's not the preferred lateral access alignment for the whole city. So it probably just needs more clarifying, really, what it is, that it's a subset and that there are larger connections that are made. And just the C comment, right? That I think C just needs to be whatever. There are many C's.
And what about the language you were talking about earlier, and we've talked about, I think, the first year we met about that coastal access, merging that together. Should we have language in the Jeep general plan to speak to that?
I'm sure you will.
Sorry,
Will
merging what
Well,
together?
the first year we met, we talked about the coastal access component, about how that will overlap with our access
coastal
we're
trail?
discussing.
Is that what you're talking
Coastal,
about?
yeah, California
Okay.
Coastal Trail. I'm
It
sorry.
is- yeah.
So will we
I just wanted
speak to
make sure I
that
knew
in
what you
general
were
plan?
referring to.
Yeah.
The coastal trail is discussed in the memo.
Okay. The current memo now?
Yes, the
Okay.
memo for lateral access
Sorry,
that you'll be
thank you.
seeing. So one thing that's slightly different between what we're focusing on in this work and the purpose of the California Coastal Trail is that the California Coastal Trail also addressed bicyclists, and that's not something that we cannot make bicycle access on the Bayside of a lot of this area. So we don't believe that the preferred alignment that we designate for the lateral access for City of Morro Bay could accommodate the California Coastal Trail in every situation, but for pedestrians, it definitely could. And one thing we looked at also is California Coastal Trail is, I believe it's legally required to be accessible 24 hours a day. And so that's another thing we thought about and discussed in the memo. And generally, there is technically 24-hour access to most of this area. It isn't necessarily where everybody wants to hang out, but if you are a through hiker, which I don't think we see a lot of these days, but thinking towards the future, perhaps it will become more of a common practice, and you're running late, you can get through if you want to. So that's something else we thought about. But in terms of the bicycle alignment, it would definitely be on the street side. But you will see a discussion in there of what has been proposed so far by the Coastal Trail planning efforts, and then how that corresponds to what we've looked at here. Yeah.
For the Dynegy building that's sort of across the street from the power plant, I'm assuming it's sort of up in this area here. How does that? I mean, that's private property as well, isn't it? Even though it's right on the waterfront. Can you get to the Bayside for that area?
If that was redeveloped, we could require it.
Right, but how far out does the private property end at the water? Does it go?
They own all the land that it sits on.
All the land, but you could.
And they own the whole facility there. We don't have any. None of it's ours. There's no lease site in front of it either.
Okay, I mean, I guess my question was, could you? I mean, again, there are areas where you're walking through parking lots. When you go that way, can you through floating access or something? Can you put something on the other side of their building? I mean, how does that?
Well, that's what I was saying. We don't have any lease sites that are out in front of it.
Okay, so it has to be a lease site for you to do that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But actually, it's an interesting question, though. I should talk a little. I'm going to actually bring that up with Eric.
Yeah, Scott, to tag onto that, well, so if someone is able to purchase that property from Dynergy, will then it be the same as Giovanni's where they're not a lease, they own the land too?
Well, they'll own the building, yeah. I mean, it'll be like Geo. It's like Geo's, yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, it'll be like that. And they own the gap that we have around between Gafco and between Gafco and Harborwalk, the gap that's there. That's also owned by Dynergy because they were going to have a second intake building just like the one that's there because they were going to have another portion of the plant. They were going to have more generating facilities over there. Didn't happen. So yeah.
So we
They were
could
gonna
still
repower the plant, I think. at some point.
Yeah, that was for this again a second intake building.
So we could still require, as a city, part of the plan approval, a Bayside
Well, I think we
walk
should- yeah, yeah.
and street side. So
should.
we could still facilitate that and connect that to the end of the existing boardwalk that goes out to the rock then.
We should.
Fill that gap in there.
And there's folks that are interested in acquiring that property there for various reasons, for various ideas that are Measure D compliant. So yeah, I mean that could happen, over time. It's mostly empty. The building, it's kind of in a state of disrepair, obviously, because they haven't been using it for a while. But
Because we're close. We have the floating access by the Papagayo all the way to there.
Yeah.
And then the regular walk that picks up north of it.
it has like a
So it's just the
it
little
even
building
has a
part.
6-foot walkway on the back side of it about that
Yeah,
you
it
can walk
does.
along there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, it's a nice hangout for seagulls and pigeons and things. It's kind of a mess, but yeah, I mean, it does actually have something that could be opened up, relatively easily without much change to it. If somebody wanted to operate the building, and use it as it is, I mean, we could probably work along those lines. So that's a good point.
Any other comments, questions, concerns?
I know this is probably off track, but has anybody talked to Dynergy? Has anybody ever talked to them? I mean, do they ever talk to us? I mean,
We talk to them. We do talk to them fairly regularly about many things. They're still going through the decommissioning process. You saw their boats out there cleaning the lines that went out there, and they're going to remove those lines out of the water.
I noticed that they were in the queue, in the interconnection queue for repowering of some kind, like wave energy they were going to bring on shore there or something. But that repowering, you keep your rights in the queue, the interconnection queue, for 3 years, and you can do it a little longer if you have something actively going. I checked actually today, and they seem to have dropped out.
Yeah, they don't have anything actively
So,
going. They're
finally.
finalizing through state lands their decommissioning of the facility. In fact, we have a mitigated negative declaration that they're processing for removal of the lines. They're going to cap them, and leave them in the area of the dunes. They don't want to disturb the dunes, but they'll be removing them out into the ocean, out to where the tie-ups for the boats were, all the way through where the waves are, which will be interesting to see how they remove those because they're buried about 10 foot down. Yeah. So I'll be curious to see how that happens. So they're actively going through that process. Dynergy's in the process of being acquired by another company. So I don't know what that's going to mean for things out there. But the last conversation we had with them was positive on the side of, and it was related to our wastewater treatment plant when council had directed us to go look at other options recently for relocating it on the west side of the highway. We talked to them about it, and they said, yeah, we'll carve out a piece for you if you want it. This is basically the same issues that our current plant site does, but some of them anyway. And so we did talk to them about that, and that was the first time they'd ever even hinted at the idea that they would sell portions of it off or separate them from the other 2 facilities that they own. They own 3 facilities in California, in Moss Landing in Oakland, and So, but I guess they're maybe in the process of selling those other 2, and this one's signed up by itself. And so,
does the decommissioning require them to do any cleanup, like environmental cleanup?
It requires them to show that you're powering it all down, and to do pulling the lines that go into the water out and cleaning those out. And so they're going through that process. I don't know that it requires a whole heck of a lot more than that, because that's the area that goes to the state lands over there, and that's why they had to go through that process. They say, hey, when you're done, you got to get this stuff out of here, and so that's what they're making them do now.
Anything else?
No, this has been really great. Partially, it's reinforced where we've already gone with some of our work, so we feel good about that, and also given us some new things to tweak a little bit and think a little more about. So thank you guys all very much, and let me finish the PowerPoint here. So I already went over the other things we're working on. We have TBD for the next GPAC, and that's because we are not sure that the plan will be ready to bring forward to you in February. So I think the city is going to be in touch with you in the next couple of weeks on that.
We'll
So
let you know where we're going. Because we have big things that are into the process right now, and because
Yeah, it's
we
like
have Plan More Base sitting on our lap right now. They've given it to us, and we're like, okay. And I'm halfway through it. I'm going to finish it tomorrow, and so probably we'll be sending it off Monday, probably, I think.
Okay.
Well, I do have a couple of questions, so probably send those to you tomorrow. But they're small, minor. And then, so next week, I anticipate us sending it off to Coastal to get their input. You know, it is 300-ish pages or whatever. So, yeah, so that's kind of predicating on what we bring back to you, unless we have the memo for this done or something.
Okay. So the February 15th date, if is that?
That's what we're saying. We're unsure if we have items for you to review right now because we have big pieces, and I don't think we're going to have the next piece of the zoning code ready for you to look at either.
think so.
Yeah, I mean, based on
the memo is possible too. Yeah.
Yeah, so we might have that. We're seeing where we're going to be. You know. Yeah, now it's all work product related, and so it's a little bit bigger of an effort than reviewing pieces of the background documentation and that type of thing. So.
Did you have any comments you wanted to make on Mr. Webb's letter that we all got? I think the more pressing thing was the issue of air quality and air monitoring.
I haven't had time to. That's still on. I hadn't had really time to kind of sit and talk with Amy about it a little bit, so I don't really have any comments on it right now. Other than it's not something we were really tracking or that folks have brought up to this point as being an issue. Certainly, was probably very important back when we had the power plant running, but less so now. I mean, our air quality here is pretty good. Doesn't mean it's always going to be that way, for sure. So it's just not something that's been brought up. This is the first time anybody's ever really suggested, hey, you should go do this. And I haven't spent a whole lot of time looking at it other than when I've been getting it and forwarding it to you so you could all see it after you gave it to me. Thank you, by the way.
And I just suggested to him that might be something to approach the council with in terms of a goal setting opportunity, whether the council would look at that as well. That could be part of our city goals to get that kind of monitoring. But I don't know enough about it. Not that much of a
I didn't have a
scientist.
whole lot of time to look
Yeah.
into it other than read it and then forward it on to the rest of the GPAC and Michael Baker.
Okay.
So.
Anything else? No? All right. Committee member closing comments? Come on, Jan. You got nothing? Okay. Anybody down here? No? All right. Community Development Director or Michael Baker, international comments?
I don't have anything. You?
Nope. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
Well,
We
thank
look forward
you.
to discussing this issue more.
Thanks for all the hard work. We are going to adjourn until our next meeting on February 15th here at the Veterans Memorial Building, unless there's nothing interesting for us to talk about. Thank you.